Nora rubbed her head and said in a cool, melodious voice, "Yes, you did." Anthony was dazzled by the little smile playing at the corner of her lips as she looked down at her daughter. Where had such an amazing beauty appeared from? This woman was absolutely stunning. It didn't cross his mind for a second that she could be Nora. Nora was indifferent to the burning fervor in his eyes. Cherry, on the other hand, blinked and asked innocently, "Mister, are you here to pick—" Before she could finish her question, Anthony tossed the placard behind him as fast as he could and interrupted her. "Of course not, little girl. I have nothing to do with that ugly lady." Disbelief appeared in Cherry's big eyes. Which part of her mum was ugly? "Mister, what are you talking about? Are you going blind? That's sad." Her words stunned Anthony for a moment. Taking advantage of the opportunity to escape, Nora stepped away coldly. Anthony wanted to go after her, but his assistant stopped him. "Mr. Gray, don't forget your father's instructions." Anthony watched Nora as she walked away with Cherry and muttered under his breath scornfully, "How great would it be if that ugly freak was even half as beautiful as her sisters? Maybe I would have put up with her disgusting behavior and not had to call off the engagement." In the presidential suite of the Hotel Finest, a Hunt Corporation hotel, Nora scrolled through her cell phone after putting Cherry to bed. She already had 7 or 8 missed calls from her family. On returning the first call, she was greeted with an angry tirade from her father. "Nora, what are you doing? Why aren't you picking up? You were the one who made all this fuss about breaking off the engagement. Get over here and stop wasting everyone's time. Your younger sister and Anthony have got something good going. Don't ruin it." It was impossible for Nora's father to let go of the Greys after climbing the social ladder and establishing a connection to such a prestigious family. That was why he had refused to break off the engagement between Anthony and Nora all these years. But now the Greys had finally relented and agreed to let Nora's half-sister marry into the family instead. The two families had reached an agreement. It was all the same to Nora's father, as long as one of his daughters married Anthony. Nora said lightly, "I'll come over now." She entrusted Cherry to Mrs. Lewis, the nanny that had travelled with them to the US, and went out. While she was waiting for the elevator, she heard some soft footsteps behind her. She turned to see a child dressed in grey silk pajamas, with tousled short hair, standing in the elevator lobby and looking around with sleepy eyes. Her daughter had short hair, and her exquisite, adorable facial features made it hard to distinguish whether she was a boy or a girl. And when they were living abroad, Cherry would always give Nora a hug every time she went out. It seemed perfectly normal for her daughter to come and wave her off, so Nora didn't think much about it. She just squatted down as she always did and hugged and kissed the child on the forehead. Although her voice was low, it was gentle. "I'll bring you some chocolate mousse cake tonight, baby. Go back to your room now." Her daughter's usually quick-witted eyes became dazed for a moment. Nora figured she was probably so sleepy that she had turned silly. Then she nodded and turned around and walked away. They were staying on the top floor of the hotel in a luxury presidential suite. There was only one other suite on the same level. Apart from the one Nora and her daughter were currently booked into, it was said that the Hunts kept the other suite free for their own use, so it was not open to guests. Nora figured there was not likely to be anyone staying there. The elevator chimed as it arrived. Nora went in right away. She was gone so quickly that she didn't see the door to the other presidential suite opening. A tall, striking figure walked out. The man's back was to the elevator entrance. His voice was low and deep, and he had an imposing aura that was hard to ignore. He ordered the child, "Go back to your room, Pete." 5-year-old Pete Hunt, the only grandson of the family, was still staring in the direction of the elevator. The soft hug and the kiss on the forehead had made him blush uncontrollably. Pete's face scrunched up tightly. He had been brought up strictly ever since he was a baby. Every one of his meals was carefully created to give him the best possible nutritional value. But a strong desire suddenly emerged in the boy, who had always been taught to exercise such strong self-control. He announced, "I want to eat some chocolate mousse cake." Justin Hunt was bemused by the child's response. He picked him up and carried him back into their suite in one arm. Exuding an icy aura that many people found intimidating, Justin walked over to his computer and continued the video conference he had been in the middle of. The person on the screen gave him their report. "Mr. Hunt, we've confirmed that Athena has indeed returned to the States. On top of that, we've just secured a photograph of her. It didn't come cheap either. I'll send it to you right away." Justin's thin lips parted slightly and he coldly spat out 2 words. "Find her." It was brightly lit at the Smiths' villa. Outside the door, Nora listened as the digital lock repeated its "input error" voice line, her lips curling up in a mocking smile. The password had been changed and no one had even bothered to tell her. She lowered her eyes emotionlessly, raised her cell phone and tapped it a few times. Then she pasted it on the digital lock. A few seconds later, the door opened with a click. There was a lively atmosphere in the living room. Seeing the gathered crowd, Nora realized she had just walked into a birthday party for her younger half-sister, Angela Smith. No one had noticed her come in, so Nora found a sofa in the corner and sat down intending to rest for a while. But soon she heard a low cry drift in from the deck outside. A few girls had surrounded another girl and were pushing her around. Angela, who was wearing a blue dress, twirled a glass of red wine in her fingers and sneered as she looked down at the girl who was being pushed to the ground. It was Nora's cousin, Lisa Black. Angela had never liked Lisa. She had always been on good terms with Nora, whom Angela despised. As Lisa stood there, one of the girls deplorably hurled, "Did you just say she actually has a nice face? There must be something wrong with your eyes. That ugly freak looks like a pig. Angela's toes are prettier than that fatty. Surely you can see how gross she is." Angela eventually seemed to decide to intervene. She took out a photo of Nora taken at a time when her weight had been especially high and played with it in her hands. "Hey, you're all being too nasty. Be nice to Lisa." Angela smiled. "Let's all just calm down and settle this with a fun little bet." Lisa's voice was weak in her throat as she said, "What kind of bet?" Angela pointed at the photo. "If you can prove that she would really be good-looking if she lost some of that weight, I'll eat this photo. If you can't do it, then you'll eat it. How does that sound? That's pretty fair, right?" The other girls laughed gleefully. "Yeah, right, she'll never lose all that weight. What will you do? What's she gonna do, get liposuction to prove she might be pretty under all of those rolls? You have absolutely no way of proving she'll look good after she slims down, so eat the photo, eat the photo." The circle of girls clapped and squealed. Angela held up the photo to Lisa's face with a mocking smile. "Are you going to eat it all yourself, or do you want us to help you with it?" Angela's eyes gleamed viciously. The party had been going so well. Everyone had been congratulating her and joking about her sister Nora. Why did Lisa have to stick her neck out and try and speak up in Nora's defense? It was too ridiculous. Angela was about to pass the photo to Lisa so she could watch her try to swallow it whole. But suddenly, a fair, slender arm reached over and plucked the photo out of her hands. It was Nora. Without a single glance at any of the girls, she balled up the photo in one fist and grabbed Angela's hair in the other. When Angela opened her mouth to cry out in pain, Nora stuffed the photo into her mouth. Her actions were as slick and smooth as butter. It was only when she tasted the bitter paper in her mouth that Angela finally pulled away. She was about to spit it out when she heard the woman say, in a low and indifferent voice, "A bet's a bet, Angela. Swallow." Angela froze. She looked at Nora as if she were a ghost. Angela didn't recognize Nora at all. All she saw was a woman wearing a simple white shirt with jeans that accentuated her long legs and slender waist. Her hair was tied in a low ponytail, with a few strands escaping to wisp around her neck. Her skin was as smooth as silk, fair and clean. She was an exceptionally beautiful girl, nothing like the Nora in Angela's memory. But still, she thought, that voice is familiar. Can it be? The other partygoers had finally noticed the scuffle and gathered round. A boy frowned. "Lady, who are you? Angela is Mr. Gray's fiancée. You better not piss off the Grays." Nora didn't reply, but she released her hold on Angela and walked up to Lisa and said with a smile, "Thank you for standing up for me." Lisa bit her lip and asked uncertainly, "Is it really you, Nora?" "Yeah, it's me." Everyone was stunned. They stared at her incredulously. A voice piped up from the back of the crowd. "Wow, she actually looks really good now." Everyone looked at Angela again. She was widely considered to be pretty, even genuinely beautiful. She had always been proud of her looks, but standing next to Nora, Angela looked dull and plain in comparison. Angela could sense the judgment of the crowd. She felt as if she had been slapped across the face. Her cheeks were burning hot with humiliation. It was her own fault. She had deliberately told Nora to come back and announced that she was no longer engaged to Anthony during the birthday party. Angela had wanted everyone to see the two women side by side and know how much more beautiful she was than Nora. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Nora was turning her into a joke. What happened? Nora's father, Henry Smith, strode into the room with his current wife. When he saw Nora, he was taken aback. He cried out, "Nora, is that you?" The shock on his face was clear. He too had never imagined his elder daughter could be so beautiful. The light in Angela's eyes flickered at the sight. Suddenly, she burst into tears and pulled the photo from her mouth. She wailed as loudly as she could for the crowd. "Nora, I'm sorry that Anthony is breaking off his engagement with you. I know you hate me for it. Take it out on me as much as you want." Her sobs snapped their father back to reality, and he reached out as if he were about to hit Nora himself. "Nora, Anthony is breaking off his engagement with you because of your bad choices, your cheating, the pregnancy. You ruined that relationship yourself. What does your sister have to do with it?" His words made Nora feel cold as ice. 5 years ago, her father's cruelty had broken her heart. She was about to defend herself when her stepmother, Wendy Simpson, suddenly came forward to restrain her father. "There are so many people watching, Henry. There are more important things to worry about right now." Nora blinked. More important things. Henry suppressed his anger and spat, "Come upstairs with me." They gathered in Henry's study. Henry, Wendy, and Angela all sat together as a family. Nora sat opposite them. She leaned against the sofa, her eyelids drooping. She knew the expression must make her look ridiculously angry, even hateful. But anyone who really knew her would understand that she was just tired. Henry went straight to the point. "Nora, the Greys have agreed to cancel your engagement. Your sister will marry Anthony instead. It's also your sister's birthday today. Why don't you give her the company that your mother left to you as a wedding and birthday gift?" Angela added eagerly, "Your pregnancy scandal embarrassed all of us. You nearly dragged the Greys down with you, and their reputation still hasn't completely recovered. You've got a lot of mistakes to make up for. You can start by giving me the company." Henry passed the contract that he had prepared in advance to Nora and said, "This is an ownership transfer agreement. Sign it." Nora's eyes went cold. It was obvious the Smiths had been the ones to resist cancelling the engagement because they wanted to use the marriage to climb up the social ladder. The Greys had also refused to cancel it for some reason, though Nora didn't know why. But now they were all trying to blame her for everything. Everything that the Smiths had came from Nora's mother originally. They had already claimed the house. Now they were trying to take the company. Nora felt her stomach coiling in disgust at their greed. She looked up from the paperwork and said, "No." Angela screeched like a cat that had been stepped on. "Nora, what do you mean by that?" Nora glanced outside. It was getting late. She wanted to get back to see Cherry and get some sleep. Not wanting to waste any more time, she said, "Angela, congratulations on your engagement, but you're not getting a wedding gift from me." Without another glance at her family, Nora stood up and walked out. Henry shouted after her, "Stop right there, Nora." But she ignored him. As she reached the front porch, Angela came running up to block her path. "Just tell me the truth, Nora. Are you going to try and take Anthony back? Is that why you're really here?" Nora shook her head. "Get out of my way." "Don't lie to me. I can see right through you. You're so shameless." Angela raised her arm, preparing to slap Nora across the face. but Nora caught her wrist before the blow could land. Angela couldn't pull free of Nora's grasp. Flustered and embarrassed, she cursed angrily. "Don't you dare think Anthony will take you back just because you're a little prettier now. He'll never marry someone like you. You ruined yourself with that little bastard child. Where is the little brat anyway? Did you finally abandon it like the father abandoned you?" Nora slapped Angela with all her strength. Her pupils were dark with fury. She looked like a madwoman, a demon crawling out of hell. "If I ever hear you say anything about my daughter again, I'm not holding back." With one last warning glare at her sister, Nora turned and left. Angela's cheek stung fiercely. Her eyes were wide with shock. She felt too scared to even cry. Neon lights flickered across the California night sky. Nora sat in the cab with her eyes closed. Lights passed across her face as the car rolled past the nightlife of California, flashing brighter and then dimming to a soft haze at random. Nora felt lonely in the glow. Angela's words about her child rang in her ears. Thinking about the whole situation depressed her all over again. It was still a mystery how she had become pregnant 5 years ago. She still had no idea who Cherry's father was. "We're here." The driver's voice interrupted Nora's thoughts. She had only just arrived and entered the hotel when a row of bodyguards rushed out in front of her and stopped her in her tracks. "Please step aside." There were other people scattered across the lobby who had also been stopped by the bodyguards. They murmured to each other in low voices. "What is Mr. Hunt going out for? It's so late." "Apparently the little Hunt boy wants to go out for chocolate mousse cake, so we all have to wait." Nora just wanted to get back to her suite and go to sleep. She felt a big yawn and stretch coming on. Just then, she spotted a tall, imposing figure striding out of the elevator with a young boy in his arms. The man kept his gaze straight as he walked forward. However, as he was about to walk past Nora, he came to a sudden halt. He looked at her piercingly and said in a deep voice, "Miss Smith?" Nora froze mid-yawn. Nora stared at Justin, her mouth hanging half open in astonishment. The man was very tall, standing at just a little over 6 feet tall. He was dressed in a black, bespoke suit that drew the eye to his long, straight legs. The lavish hotel lights spilled across his blank expression, highlighting the angles of his face. He radiated arrogance. However, the mole at the corner of his eye brought a charming touch of human beauty to his cool conduct. For all his haughtiness, his manner was restrained. The little boy he was holding also wore a suit. He had buried his head in the man's shoulder. A casual onlooker might have assumed he was just a shy child, but he had been taught to hide his face when he went out in public. The Hunt family feared the media might try to take photos of their youngest child and start trouble for him. But Nora was in no mood to wonder about the child in Justin's arms, or appreciate Justin's good looks. She had more important things to worry about. Had Justin Hunt found out that she was Athena? The alarming idea had just occurred to her when she noticed Justin's frown. He looked straight at her and said, "Stay away from my son. Also, you're not my type." His voice was deep and melodious, smooth and musical to the ear. It made people want to hear him speak a little more, at least until they were driven away by his chilly aura. Nora's eyelids had been drooping because of drowsiness, but now they widened big and round in confusion. The other people in the hotel lobby looked at her all at once, and then took a step back as if she was contagious. Hushed whispers broke out amongst the crowd. "That was a bad move. I've heard many people have tried to get close to Mr. Hunt through his son, but he hates that more than anything. The last woman who tried to cozy up to the Hunt's youngest ended up with some old man in the end. I don't know what the woman did, but clearly she screwed up." It was only when she overheard their comments that Nora finally understood why Mr. Hunt had spoken to her so rudely. She shook her head in disbelief at his arrogant assumption. Is that man out of his mind? Once Justin had left, his bodyguards also withdrew. After a few moments, the hotel lobby went back to normal. Inside the Hunt family's extra-long black Bentley, Nora saw a man in a suit. He was dressed in a black, bespoke suit that drew the eye to his long, straight legs. The lavish hotel lights spilled across his blank expression, highlighting the angles of his face. Justin's son Pete had a sullen look on his face, and he made a silent protest. Justin frowned. After his son's abnormal behavior earlier that night, he had checked the surveillance camera footage in the corridor. There, he saw that woman he had just encountered in the lobby had kissed and hugged his son. The problem was that for the very first time, Pete, who had always avoided others and disliked physical contact, hadn't resisted. Had that woman overcome his son's shyness with her beauty? He thought back to her sheer loveliness that even her casual clothing couldn't hide. There had been a kind of wild carelessness in her manner, from the way she stood to her gesture when she yawned. Not to mention that startling defiance in her cat-like eyes when she was facing him. She was utterly unlike any other woman she had up her sleeve. Back at the Smith house, Anthony arrived just as the birthday party was ending. Angela's face was swollen and a clear handprint could be seen on her cheek. She pressed a towel filled with ice cubes to the bruise. In tears, she complained, "Why are you so late, Anthony?" He looked uncomfortable for a moment. On the way to the Smiths, he had taken a detour and asked a private investigator to help him find out more about the beautiful woman he had seen at the airport that day. Anthony coughed awkwardly and put on an anxious and concerned look. "What happened? Did Nora hit you? Is she refusing to cancel the engagement? Where is she? I'll take care of it myself." Angela hesitated. Take care of it himself, but that means he'll see her. She thought of that aggressively beautiful face and her heart filled with dread. She tried to tell herself she was being silly. Even if Anthony were to see Nora again, that didn't mean he would like what he saw. Right? Angela tightened her hold on the towel. Finally, she said, "Anthony, you don't need to go in person. It's not about you. She just won't let go of the company. Don't worry, I'll make her come around in the end." Anthony didn't insist. He was too distracted to really hear what Angela was saying. He nodded and said, "We need to get that company, or Grandpa will never agree to our engagement. I'll leave this matter to you. I don't want to see her pig-like face either. How did she look? I bet she got even uglier while she was away, right?" Angela hesitated. She avoided answering the question, just saying, "You don't have to worry about seeing her again. I'll definitely come up with a solution." Okay. After leaving the Smiths, Anthony drove absent-mindedly. His mind was filled with memories of the woman from the airport. He didn't know who she was, but her aura and her beauty were unlike anything he had seen in his life. He thought to himself, "It'd be great if I could marry her instead." As soon as the thought formed, he was overcome with a strong desire to see her again. A moment later, he received a call from the private investigator. "Mr. Gray, I couldn't find the identity of your mystery woman, but I found the hotel where she's staying." Anthony's eyes lit up. "Send me the address." When Nora reached her suite, she found that Mrs. Lewis had already put Cherry to bed. The little girl was already asleep. Nora went straight to the study. She sat on the sofa and made a call. "Solo, give me everything you can about Idelian Pharmaceuticals." The usually lively voice on the other end sounded a little petulant. "Hey, watch your tone, Anthea. You can't boss me around just because you saved my life. I'm the world's #1 hacker. I deserve some respect. I'm not running your errands. Name a fair price and we'll call it even. How does that sound?" The corners of Nora's lips curled upward slightly. "Sure. How much is your life worth?" After a moment of silence, Solo said, "Fine, give me 5 minutes." 5 minutes later, Solo emailed her all the information they had about Idelian Pharmaceuticals, the company Nora's mother had left behind when she died. Nora had only been a child at the time, so the company had been put in the care of a dedicated manager. She had never taken much interest in the company in all this time, but for her father to want it so much, to demand that she give it to Angela as a wedding gift, Nora figured there must be something fishy going on. She carefully combed through the information until she heard faint footsteps from out in the hotel's soundproof corridor. Disturbed by the sound, Nora frowned. Seeing her look, Mrs. Lewis explained, "There are people staying in the presidential suite next door. I heard it's Mr. Hunt himself." Just then, Nora's cell phone beeped. It was a message from Solo. "The Hunts are very impressive. Mr. Hunt just offered me a few $1,000,000 to tell him whether you're a man or a woman. Athena, you're in trouble." Justin Hunt again. Nora cast her cat-like eyes slightly downward. Her long, slender fingers tapped a few times on the keyboard as she thought. Finally, she replied, "I want you to send him a message for me." In the presidential suite next door, the tall and slender Justin sat on the sofa and leaned back. His assistant, Lawrence Zimmer, stood by respectfully. "Mr. Hunt, Solo has a message for you from Dr. Athena." Justin looked up coldly. "What is it?" Lawrence coughed awkwardly and adjusted his glasses. He read out the message as matter-of-factly as he could manage. "Dr. Athena asks, Mr. Hunt, are you rushing to find me because you need brain surgery?" Justin stared at him. Lawrence shivered in the silence. He felt like the temperature in the room was dropping to freezing point. The photo, which had been taken half a year ago, was just a snapshot from one of Athena's surgeries. The subject was wearing a surgical cap, and their body was fully covered. All one could tell was that it was a slightly chubby woman. She was looking down at her work with cat-like eyes, her gaze focused and serious. Justin thought those eyes looked a little familiar. But just as quickly as the thought occurred to him, he dismissed it. The physique of the woman next door didn't match. It wasn't her. As Justin racked his brains for an answer, next door, Mrs. Lewis was pushing Nora to go to bed. "Nora, you can't do late nights with your poor health. You need more sleep than other people, not less. I can't allow you to stay up any later." Nora stretched and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Okay." Although she had recovered from her illness 5 years ago, her constitution was weak and she had little energy. She needed a full 12 hours of sleep every night. During her time abroad, her aunt had even nicknamed her the Queen of Sleep. If she didn't have a reason to get up, she could just sleep straight through 3 days and 3 nights. The next morning, she was woken up by the sound of her phone ringing. She answered the call with her eyes closed. She could hear Angela's voice on the other end. "Have you company?" "Not really." Angela softened her tone, as if trying to sound charitable. "How about this? Let's both take a step back. I'll give you $500,000 if you transfer the company to me. That would be a good trade, right?" Nora turned over and found a comfortable position, but still did not open her eyes. Idelian Pharmaceuticals' annual net income was approximately $5 million. It had been handed to her father as her nominal guardian for the last few years, but the company really belonged to her. Although the money didn't mean all that much to her, she wasn't about to just give her mother's company away. Angela continued, sarcasm creeping into her voice. "Does your aunt even have $100,000 saved up after all her hard work? This is $500,000 we're talking about. You've probably never seen that much money in your life, right?" Nora pressed her lips together, silently amused. The presidential suite cost $100,000 per night. Her aunt had been so concerned about ensuring Cherry's comfort while Nora looked for a house that she had booked an entire month's stay. Angela couldn't be more wrong. When Nora didn't respond, Angela changed her strategy. "Nora, you might not know this, but that company isn't making any money at all. It'll go bankrupt soon. If you transfer the company to me, there may still be a chance to make it profitable." In her mind, Nora laughed at her sister's lie. Angela went on. "It's a pharmaceutical company. You were never great in school. You wouldn't get it. I'm a high-achieving medical student, and I've got a ton of professional knowledge. I'm even going to apply to study as a postgraduate student under Professor Athena. Athena is the most amazing surgeon in the world, and they can perform even the most difficult operations. They're a legend. They're really mysterious, though. Boston University has gone to a lot of trouble to get them to come over to be a professor there. I don't even know why I'm bothering to explain this to you. It's not like you understand what I'm saying. Nora, just quit while you're ahead. Don't stick to a bad decision just to make a point. The company will only go bankrupt faster." Nora knitted her brows in annoyance. "You talk too much." Agitated, Angela demanded, "What do you mean by that?" She wasn't bothering with trying to sound nice anymore. "Are you pretending to be dumb because you don't want to cancel the engagement? Anthony loves me for my looks and my brains. Even if you don't give me the company as a wedding gift, he'll still marry me all the same. So do you want to do this the easy way or the hard way?" Nora hung up and tossed the cell phone aside. She hugged her pillow and fell into a deep sleep once more. Angela's threats were ridiculous. The Smith family was full of monsters. Nora refused to waste her time worrying about them. After finishing up her 12 hours of sleep, Nora finally forced herself to get out of bed. She needed to find a private investigator to look for clues about her son's whereabouts. She got dressed and prepared to go out. At the door, Cherry gave her a very quick hug before going straight back to the game she was playing. Nora called after her, "Don't play games on your phone all day. I don't want you ruining your eyesight." "Ha! That's 4 kills! Got you, dummy!" Cherry's hand tapped away quickly on the phone she was holding. When she heard her mum, she nodded without even looking up. "Okay, don't worry, Mum, I'll take care of Mrs. Lewis." Nora shook her head. Cherry clearly wasn't listening to her at all. After a moment's hesitation, Nora added, "There's a very difficult person next door. Try not to go outside." Cherry's eyes immediately widened with interest. "Is he a monster, Mummy?" Justin's arrogant face appeared in her mind. Nora, who had always been reserved by nature, said slowly, "Well, this monster is very handsome and has a mole in the corner of his eye, but it seems that his brain isn't working very well." "Oh," Cherry waved. "I definitely won't go out then. I don't play with dummies." Nora laughed as she closed the door and got ready to go to the elevator. But as she turned, she immediately froze. Without her even realizing it, Justin had come to stand behind her. He was so tall he made the spacious hallway seem cramped. His dark eyes were staring at her, and even the mole at the corner of his eye seemed to exude a bone-deep chill. He was probably going out. An assistant and a bodyguard followed behind him. There were only the 3 of them, but his presence was no weaker than it had been during their encounter in the lobby the previous evening. Nora raised her eyebrows. To be fair, her aunt had given her 1,000 reminders and warnings before she returned to the States. Nora knew her aunt could protect her from most people, no matter what she said. However, Nora also knew that no one could mess with Justin Hunt. She had sent him a sarcastic message as Athena last night. That had been easy to do from a distance, but now... Nora cast her cat-like eyes down slightly and said casually, "Mr. Hunt, I was just joking with my daughter. I definitely wasn't talking about you." Mr. Hunt's assistant, Lawrence, fought to keep from laughing, but the corner of his lips twitched a little. He couldn't believe how this woman dared to lie to Mr. Hunt's face. He had heard everything she had said about the monster with a mole at the corner of its eye. She hadn't said it aloud, but it was clear that monster's last name was Hunt. There was no visible emotion on Justin's face. He was rarely expressive, which made it difficult for people to know what he was thinking. He merely cast a long look at Nora before taking the lead and walking ahead. Nora hung back deliberately to let Hunt's group take the elevator and put some distance between them. Once they were gone, she let out a sigh of relief. That man had only given her a simple glance just now, but she could feel the fury in his look. He was trouble. It was best she stayed far away from him. In the elevator, Justin narrowed his eyes slightly. He hadn't been able to see clearly in the dim lighting the night before, but running into her today, he could see she was astonishingly pretty. She kept her cat-like eyes turned down demurely, long and black. She appeared sweet but a wild out of nowhere. Something about her felt familiar, particularly the way she stung him with such polite insults. Back in the Hunt suite, Pete waited until he was sure his father was gone. He was a little afraid of his father sometimes. In his head, he thought of the man as a demon lord. Once he was sure the coast was clear, he dialed the neighboring room's phone extension. Someone picked up and he heard a young voice say, "Hello?" Pete paused. "I'm staying next door. Can I come over and visit you?" The little girl sounded surprised. "Oh, are you the little dummy from next door?" Pete was shocked into silence. He was used to everyone knowing him as a genius and a prodigy. This was the first time someone had called him a dummy. However, the little girl quickly spoke again. "Can you play games with me?" A light twinkled in Pete's dark eyes, and he replied, Yes, I can. Hotel Finest was the most prestigious hotel in California. It was lavishly decorated, and the clean marble floor reflected light. Everything looked decadent and expensive, a hint of the great wealth of the owners. Anthony sat on a sofa in the lobby, staring at the elevator doors and waiting. The hotel management was strict, and the front desk had refused to sell him guest information. He had no other choice but come early and wait, hopeful that he could find the woman. His hard work paid off, and he jumped to his feet when he saw her gracefully exit the elevator. He presented her with a bouquet of fresh roses and blocked her path in what he thought was a charming manner. "Hello, beautiful. What a wonderful coincidence. I didn't expect us to meet again." Nora was irritated. She knew he didn't recognize her, and it was all a long time ago, but they'd annulled their engagement. Why was this guy suddenly showing up everywhere she went? Anthony didn't notice her annoyance and said with a smile, "It seems like we're destined to be. Surely you'll tell me your name." Nora narrowed her eyes. She hadn't intended to pay any attention to him, but then she thought of how he'd been in the delivery room when she'd given birth. He must remember something about what had happened. Perhaps she could sound him out. Isabel Anderson. Anderson was her mother's surname. Anthony's eyes lit up. "Are you free, Miss Anderson? How about a coffee? There's a cafe next door." She nodded in agreement, and he eagerly set off. "Just this way, Miss Anderson. By the way, where's your sister?" She frowned slightly. "My sister?" "Yes, that little girl with you at the airport yesterday. You only look about 20. You can't possibly have a daughter that age, right?" He clearly thought he was being charming. Nora kept quiet. She couldn't explain and risk revealing who she was. "It's just as well she's not here. She won't bother us. The cakes from the cafe are pretty good. You can bring some back for her." The way to impress a woman is to please everyone around her, thought Anthony smugly. Nearby, Justin, who'd been inspecting the hotel, stared at them coldly. Behind him, Lawrence, his assistant, sneered. "That woman's too much, Mr. Hunt. Never mind that she deliberately approached Pete to meet you. Now she's flirting with someone else. What is she up to? And she referred to her daughter as her sister when she was lying to that man. I don't see her putting in that much effort when she was lying to you." Justin's expression darkened. A sharp look flashed across his deep-set eyes, and the temperature of the entire lobby seemed to drop a few degrees. He said frostily, "Look her up." "Yes, sir." After walking into the cafe, Nora found a table by the window. She quickly turned the topic of conversation to Anthony's engagement. He was keen to explain himself. "I'm not really a scumbag, Miss Anderson. You don't know how ugly she was. Her face was so fat you could barely see her eyes. When she walked, it was like the whole place shook. She used this excuse that her obesity was due to hormonal injections. She thought she'd be a beauty if she slimmed down. She was also ignorant. She dropped out of school in the 3rd grade and stayed home, cooping herself up in her room. She didn't even complain when she was punished or scolded, much less retaliate. But the worst of it was she ended up pregnant with another man's child. How could I possibly marry her? I didn't trust her. It would have been unfair to expect me to marry an uneducated, illiterate, obese liar like that, wouldn't it?" Nora drifted off as she listened to him. She'd known since childhood that crying and making a fuss were useless in a home like hers. She'd never fought back when she was punished because she'd always kept her mother's last words firmly in her mind. "You must seem plain and mediocre. You can't show everyone just how clever you are until you're grown up." Her mother had said it was the only way she could survive. Well, the tables had turned now, hadn't they? Little did Anthony know how successful she'd become. She just needed to get her son back, and her life would be complete. I really hated the Smiths' behavior. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be humoring Angela now either. Anthony realized he'd said too much, so he quickly changed the subject, looking flustered. "Oh, why am I saying such things? Where are you from, Miss Anderson?" Nora made up an answer. "New York." The Andersons from New York? Anthony swallowed hard. That was a powerful family, even more so than the Hunts. Anthony was impressed. He fawned over her even more. "I didn't realize you came from such a wealthy family. No wonder you're so elegant and charming." Nora ignored his attempt at a compliment and continued to sound him out. She acted casual, but her grip around her coffee cup had tightened slightly. I heard that your fiancé gave birth to a child 5 years ago, but it was abandoned. I'm really curious, where did that child go? Anthony was dismissive. That's just a rumor, Miss Anderson. No one was abandoned. My fiancé took the child abroad. What the Smiths had announced publicly at the time was that Nora had given birth to a baby girl. They hadn't mentioned that she'd actually had twins. After all, they'd been ostracized and humiliated if anyone knew they'd done something like abandoning a newborn infant. Image was far too important to them for anyone to find out what had really happened. Nora scoffed. I'm just curious. Since you don't want to tell me, forget it. She slammed her cup down on the table and pretended she was getting up to leave, acting like a spoiled princess. It had the desired effect. Anthony panicked and reached out to grab her. That's not what I meant, don't get mad. Nora evaded him and raised an eyebrow. So are you going to answer me or not? Her behavior didn't make him suspicious. After all, secrets and rumors about wealthy families were common topics of gossip. He spoke reluctantly. Uncle Henry Smith, was the one who handled all that back then. I really don't know anything. Nora believed that Anthony didn't know the truth. Even though he'd been there at the time, it must have been hidden from him somehow. He was of no further use to her. She got up and walked out. He watched in astonishment for a moment, but then he pushed his chair back and went after her. I'm telling the truth, Miss Anderson. Why don't you give me your number? We can contact... I don't think so. Nora got in a taxi and left him standing there, confused. Are all women from super rich families that volatile? His expression darkened. Nora contacted some private investigators she knew in California to look for more information. It was evening when she finally dragged herself back to the hotel, exhausted. As soon as she opened the door to her room, she heard Cherry's side of an involved online conversation with another child. The princess is here, everyone step aside, you're to escort her. Okay. Do you want to try my cannon? Hey silly, tank the damage from the defensive tower, go. I'm out of health points. Hey, why are you running? Tank the damage for me and I'll be able to get the 5 kills. I'll die. Oh come on you wuss, it's only a game, what are you so afraid of? Cherry was usually very cute and well behaved, but once she started playing games on her phone, she quickly became bad-tempered and impatient. In fact, even the tirade she was launching at the other child was relatively mild and self-restrained compared to how she could be. Who's that kid she's playing with, though? Nora's curiosity was piqued. Nora walked into the living room and saw Cherry in her pajamas holding her cell phone. She was sitting cross-legged and playing happily. When she heard the door open, the little girl turned and looked over. Sensing that her mum was about to get mad, Cherry put on a bright smile and blinked her big round eyes. Mummy, you're finally back. I was so bored. I missed you so much. Nora sighed silently. I guess me not having much time to spend with her is why she ends up playing on that phone so much. She resisted her drowsiness and the desire to immediately jump into bed and sleep forever. Instead, she said, Come on, Cherry, let's have dinner out tonight. Mrs. Lewis asked, What would you like to wear tonight, Cherry? Cherry thought about it seriously. The little grey Gucci suit. Nora frowned. Are you wearing boys' clothes again? Cherry was a quirky child. She liked going out dressed as a little boy. She continued to stare at the phone. Uh-huh. This round's ending soon, Mummy. What are we having? Nora reached over and grabbed the cell phone before answering. We're having pizza downstairs. She turned off the game. Hey, we're raiding soon. Cherry was about to throw a tantrum, but when her eyes met Nora's, she pursed her lips and squeezed out 3 words through gritted teeth. Fine. Let's go. In the room next door, Pete stared at his cell phone. Sweet Cherry had logged off the game and disconnected the call. He felt a small sense of loss at the bottom of his heart. Chester Hunt, who was sitting on the sofa, breathed a sigh of relief at the sight. Thank God, kiddo, you done at last. My grumpy brother is coming back soon, so let's hurry up and get this place tidy. Peter looked at him sullenly and didn't reply. Chester came over and looked at his phone. Who are you playing with? Hey, don't sulk. I'll play with you sometime. I'm really good. I'm in the top 10 rankings on the local server. Our team leader, Sweet Cherry, is top. The two of us are online buddies. I'll get him to let you join and we can play together next time. Pete turned off the screen and stood up. Uncle Chester, I want to have pizza. Chester felt a headache coming on. Come on, kiddo, don't push it. Justin's not going to agree to that. Pete was the only grandson of the Hunts, and as such, he was treated like a VIP. His daily schedule was meticulously planned out, every moment busy and strictly controlled. As Justin wasn't around today, and Chester felt sorry for the poor little nephew of his, he'd indulged him and let him play games all afternoon. But eating out, that would definitely test the limits of Justin's patience. Chester continued to dissuade him. You forced him to take you out for cake yesterday by refusing to take your medication, but that's not going to work twice. Come on, kiddo, work with me here. Pete didn't listen to his uncle. He went to the bedroom and opened the closet. He was about to grab a random outfit when he spotted the limited edition grey Gucci suit. He impulsively put it on and walked to the door. Chester tried to stop him. Your dad's downstairs, he'll see you. Pete looked at him coolly. It'll be fine so long as he's not at the door. Chester watched him leave, feeling an impending sense of doom. 1 minute later, Justin opened the door and strode in, his presence as strong as ever. As he entered, Chester greeted him weakly, terrified. Justin! Justin paused in taking off his coat. His inky eyes swept across the room, and his expression darkened. Where's Pete? He didn't sound happy. Chester became even more scared. He's gone to the pizza place downstairs. Justin spun round angrily to head back out the door, catching Chester off guard. He shouted, I know it's my fault, Justin. Hold back Oh. Justin had already left. Chester thought he'd had a narrow escape and heaved a sigh of relief. He shuddered when he heard his brother call back along the corridor. I'll deal with you when I get back. The pizzas at Hotel Finest were expensive but delicious. There were so many toppings, and you could have any flavour you wanted. Nora grabbed a menu and walked toward the empty tables with Cherry skipping along behind her. She looked awfully handsome dressed in her little suit, and there was a sly look in her spirited eyes. Mummy, I'll go look at the cakes. Okay, Nora called after her. A moment later, she looked up to see her daughter standing in front of her, staring at her with wide eyes. Pete had only been trying his luck. He hadn't really expected to meet her again. Joy sparked in his eyes for the first time in his life. Nora asked in confusion, Did you not find the cake counter, baby? Pete blushed. His grandparents called him that at home occasionally, but this woman's voice sounded so affectionate. His eyes turned red and he asked her quietly, Are you my mummy? Nora was puzzled. What was wrong with Cherry? Why was she acting so strangely? Is it because I logged her off her game just now? Surely not. She bent over and stroked the child's head. Chuckling slightly, she gave up. Okay, it's all Mummy's fault. What do you want to have? I'll order for you, okay? The child held up the menu. How about pepperoni? Pete's eyes widened. It really is, Mummy. He had so many questions he wanted to ask. Why did you abandon me? Where have you been all these years? But he swallowed them down before they tumbled out of him. He'd grown up being taken care of by Justin and had difficulty expressing his feelings. He could only nod heavily. Yeah. Nora was completely unaware of her mix-up and how complicated the boy's emotions were. She still thought he was Cherry. She took his hand and walked to a quiet, inconspicuous table in the corner. Cherry, who was lingering at the cake counter, looked at the mousse cake, then the Black Forest cake, unable to decide. In the end, and only after she'd decided that she'd have both, she turned to head back to her mother. As she turned around, she saw a man walking towards her aggressively. He stretched out a strong arm, picked her up, and forcibly carried her toward the restaurant exit. You can't eat this, it's all junk food. Cherry struggled fiercely. Who are you? Let go of me. Help, someone's kidnapping me. The noise attracted a lot of attention. People gasped and stared. Justin's good upbringing took over. He regained his composure, aware he shouldn't be causing a scene in public. He snapped at the child he thought was his son. I'm your father. Chester, who had come after them, held his head in his hands as he helplessly watched the situation unfold in front of him. It's all over. The kiddo and my brother are at it again. Justin was domineering. Everything was fine when Pete was obedient, but he could also be stubborn and obstinate. After all, like father, like son. Once he refused to behave, chaos would always inevitably ensue, and it was left to Chester to negotiate peace. He was just thinking of calling his parents for backup when he noticed that Justin had stopped in his tracks. Chester watched in surprise. This didn't normally happen. Justin was frozen to the spot, still holding the child. Cherry was crying hard and her sobs racked her tiny little body. She touched Justin's face with her hand. "Dad, you're my daddy." Justin was at a loss for words. His son always had a sullen look on his face, but now the child seemed a lot more animated. Big teardrops rolled down from dark eyes, accompanied with distressed wails. It made Justin feel extraordinarily helpless. He had no idea why his son was so emotional. Hey, calm down. Stop crying," Justin said hoarsely. He stretched out his hand awkwardly, trying to wipe the tears away. A soft little hand grabbed his fingers instead. "Daddy." Cherry was overwhelmed. She finally had a father. She was no longer a child that had popped up by some unexplained magic. Although Cherry was lively and outgoing, she had always felt terribly envious every time she had seen other children being lifted high into the air by their fathers. The soft voice caused Justin to swallow back the cliched "real men don't cry" line he'd been about to resort to. He's only 5. He's still just a child. Justin's usually hard heart softened. Instead, he chided gently. "Oh, really now? Crying and making a fuss just because of some food?" He put the child back on the ground. Cherry clasped his large hand tightly, as though she was afraid he'd disappear. She looked up and said, "Let's have dinner together, Daddy." Justin looked at his watch. "I only have an hour." Chester watched them speechlessly. Until now, Pete had gone home hungry and accepted punishment, instead of pushing his luck. Something must have changed in him. Cherry was terribly excited. She had found such a handsome father. She didn't stop to question this life-changing revelation. She chatted to him constantly. "Eat this, Daddy. This is expensive." "Don't drink so much juice, Daddy. It's too filling. You won't have space to eat much." Justin stared solemnly at this child who was behaving like a totally different person from his son. Chester, who joined them, whispered jokingly, "Justin, has Pete had a personality transplant?" After they'd eaten, Cherry took Justin's hand and walked toward the table in the corner. "Daddy, look, Mummy's over there." Justin looked where she was pointing and saw the woman again. She was leaning against the comfortable sofa in the corner, not paying attention to anything going on around her. She rested her head on one hand as she ate absent-mindedly, chasing the food around her plate with a fork. She was undeniably charming and had beautiful pianist's fingers. A child sat opposite her, only the top of their hair visible to Justin. He assumed it was her daughter. Justin stopped staring and bent down to look at Cherry solemnly. "She's not your mummy." "Yes, she is. She is my mummy." Justin studied the child and said harshly, "Remember this. Don't ever trust any woman, especially a beautiful one." Cherry's eyes widened in outrage. Why won't he accept Mummy? She started crying again, only this time they were hot, angry tears of sadness, not joy. "If you don't recognize her as my mummy, then you're not my father." Justin was getting increasingly cross, and his face showed it. His brain whirred as he thought, how has that woman bewitched my son to make him say something like that? He suddenly realized something and asked, "Did you come down here together?" Cherry replied, "Of course." It was as he'd suspected. It seemed clear to him now. Why else would he suddenly want pizza? Justin scoffed to himself. That woman had been flirting with another man this afternoon, and now she was once again trying to seduce him by using his son. It seemed the verbal warning he'd given her the previous night hadn't been enough. He spoke more forcefully this time. "You're not to talk to her anymore." Cherry looked sadly over at her mother in confusion, then up at her big, tall father. In the end, she gritted her teeth and headed toward the exit with Justin. She wanted to help her mummy bring Daddy home, and she jabbered away at him as they headed to collect his coat. "Daddy, isn't my mummy good looking? She's so much prettier than lots of celebrities. If you get together again, think how good you'll look. You'll make such an impressive couple." Justin stared at him in wonder. What on earth had that woman said to my son? Nora was close to falling asleep. She was curious as to why her daughter seemed to have been so exceptionally sensible the whole evening. She was usually such a fussy eater, but she hadn't picked anything off her pizza. She'd eaten the whole thing. Nora also couldn't understand why she was eating so slowly. That was different too. She was slightly worried. "Have you eaten enough yet?" Pete rubbed his belly. He knew that he'd probably be grounded by his dad when he got back upstairs, but he dawdled for over an hour because he was reluctant to part with his mummy now he'd found her. In response to her question, he smiled shyly and said, "I think I want another piece of cake." "Go ahead." Nora smiled back at him and then sank further into the comfy sofa and closed her eyes. Cherry had taken the opportunity to sneak back in and check on her mother, while Justin and Chester were collecting their belongings. When she saw how sleepy she looked, she felt guilty. Her mum had been working so hard lately, and coming out for dinner with her was taking time out of her sleep schedule. They hadn't even eaten together in the end. She shouldn't have gone with Daddy and left Mommy here. Cherry walked over and sighed. "Are you sleepy, Mummy? Let's go back upstairs." "She's finally full," thought Nora as she stretched. "Okay." They left the restaurant holding hands. A minute later, Pete came back from the cake counter and saw the empty table. The light in his eyes slowly dimmed and his shoulders slumped. His father's deep voice spoke behind him. "Time's up. Where did you disappear to?" Pete's tiny body trembled. He turned around and saw his dad standing impatiently behind him. He almost shrank back in fear, knowing he'd be scolded for the evening's escapade. But the next moment, Justin bent over and picked him up. He even asked, "Are you full?" Pete was surprised by his dad's unusual behavior. He was expecting to be yelled at, not hugged. Why isn't he angry? Maybe he's decided to be nicer to me from now on. Nora was about to go to bed when the doorbell rang. She asked impatiently, "Who is it?" An unfamiliar male voice replied, "Miss Smith, my name is Hunt." "Hunt?" Nora got up. "Open the door, Cherry." "Mummy, I'm in the middle of a fierce team battle," said Cherry, not looking up from her phone. She continued to diss her teammates angrily. "Be careful of the one at the bat. Hey, Chesty, how many times have you died already? Why are you so rubbish at this game?" Rolling her eyes at her daughter's enthusiasm for the violent game, Nora walked over to open the door herself. It wasn't Justin standing outside, but a younger man. He looked about 20 years old. He was wearing casual clothes and slouched against the wall playing a game on his cell phone. His eyes were similar to Justin's but brighter, and he looked harmless. In fact, he looked exactly like she would expect a well-brought-up boy from a rich family to look. When he saw her opening the door, Chester lowered his voice and spoke into the phone. "Leader, I'm already dead anyway, so play this round without me." He turned it off and raised his head to look at Nora. She was astonishingly beautiful. Her cat-like eyes looked sleepy though, and her voice was low as she asked, "Is something the matter?" Chester said, "Miss Smith, there's something delicate I'd like to discuss with you. We need you to give up this presidential suite and move to one downstairs." Nora raised her eyebrows. "Why?" He held out a check. "I'm afraid I can't disclose the reason behind this decision, but let me assure you it has not been taken lightly. As you are no doubt aware, this hotel belongs to the Hunts. According to our regulations, if we cancel a booking without reason, we'll pay double for breaching the contract. The check's for $5,000. Nora stared at the check wordlessly. Do I look like I'm strapped for cash or something? Why is everyone trying to buy me off? Seeing that she wasn't giving in, Chester turned more threatening. "If you don't agree, then I'll have to ask security to throw you out. I'm sure you don't." How have I tried to seduce him? Chester was angry now. The audacity of this woman. Didn't you spend a ton of money to stay in this room right next door to him so you could take advantage of the proximity? You've managed to deceive Pete, but he's a child. I'm not that stupid. I've looked into you. Your fiancé broke off your engagement and you were unmarried when you gave birth. What makes a woman like you think you're worthy of my brother? Whoa, have I missed something? How am I in the wrong just by staying next door? What makes Justin so superior? Nora was fed up. So no one's worthy of staying in this room, is that it? Chester wasn't keen on her change of attitude. His reply was sarcastic. Of course not. My brother has discovered that Dr. Athena is staying in this hotel. When he finds her, he'll invite her to stay here. Only distinguished guests like that deserve to stay next door to my brother. Nora was puzzled. How did they find out Athena was staying here, but not that I'm her? She wasn't afraid of Justin, but getting entangled with a man like that would be problematic. She thought for a moment. Then she took the check from Chester's hand and said lightly, "Thank you. Send someone up to help us with the transfer." Chester breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness for that. The new suite downstairs wasn't as good as the 2 top-class ones up here, but it was plenty big enough for 3 people. Most importantly, the new keycard wouldn't allow access to the top floor, meaning she wouldn't have any chance of running into Pete anymore, let alone Justin. Why did she thank me, though? Chester was perplexed as he returned to his own room, but he decided to think no more of it. He reported to Justin, saying, "You don't have to thank me, Justin. This favor to you makes up for my mistake earlier with Pete." Justin was sitting at a large desk, both hands tapping away quickly on a keyboard. Without even looking up, he chided him in a low voice. "Why are you causing trouble?" Chester frowned. Why was he detecting dissatisfaction in his brother's words? He thought he'd done the right thing for once. He went to join Justin and saw that the computer screen was covered in intertwined lines. Among them, a red dot was moving slowly. It was Dr. Athena, the person Justin had been keeping tabs on for half an hour, tracking her movements. Suddenly, the red dot flashed a few times and disappeared. "You've lost her, Justin," said Chester before he could stop himself. Justin swore and glared at his brother. "I can see that," he growled. Chester instantly shut up. Lawrence glanced at Chester and sighed inwardly. The Hunt family was so complicated, and all Justin's other relatives were like him, highly intelligent and hard to read. How had they produced such a simpleton? He coughed and said, "Mr. Hunt, why would she suddenly go offline at this critical moment? Do we have a traitor?" Justin shook his head. He'd been tracking her himself this time as finding her was so crucial. Her surgical skills were invaluable to his family. Only the 3 of them in that room, himself, Chester, and Lawrence, knew about his desire to find her. There's no way Athena could have been tipped off. It must have been a coincidence. The hotel was very efficient. Half an hour later, Nora was already settled in the study of her new suite. After she'd successfully blocked an external attack, she called Solo, who tried to explain. "Sorry, Mr. Hunt found a top-class hacker from somewhere and got information on you from me. At the moment, he's only found out that you're staying at the Hotel Finest. Your exact location hasn't been exposed yet." Said Nora. "Be more careful next time." She hung up and went to check on Cherry. The child was seemingly already asleep in her new bedroom. Nora went to her own room and collapsed on the bed, finally able to sleep, exhausted after her full-on day. 2 minutes later, Cherry eased her bedroom door open and poked her head out. After confirming that her mother was asleep, she gently closed the door, took out her cell phone, and logged back onto her game. Chester was relieved. "You're finally back, leader. Where have you been?" Cherry groaned. "Ugh, the idiot next door demanded we change rooms, totally out of the blue." "What? Which idiot is that? How dare they bully our leader? I hope he chokes to death on a glass of water." Chester didn't think any more of it after that. After all, you meet all kinds of strange people when staying in hotels. "Didn't you say yesterday that you're back in California after living abroad all this time? I've come all this way to look for you. Where are you staying? The top-class suite next to mine just so happens to be vacant. It's on me." They hadn't found Athena yet, so it was still empty. In response, he heard Sweet Cherry scolding him. "Get into position, Chesty. Even the monsters in the river are better than you at getting into their positions." It was only after she'd scolded him that she replied, "I'm staying at the Hotel Finest." Chester spluttered and started coughing violently. Once he'd recovered his breath, he said, "I'm in Hotel Finest too. I'll come to you." "Okay." Cherry and Chesty had known each other for over 6 months. They got along well and were good friends. They'd already planned to meet when she got back to the States, so she agreed as soon as Chester suggested the idea. "Which room are you in?" he asked eagerly. Cherry was about to tell him when she suddenly thought of something. "Not tonight, my mum's asleep. Let's meet tomorrow instead." He laughed. "Everyone says you sound like a little girl because you're using a voice changer and that you're really a grumpy middle-aged man. Can you at least tell me whether you're a man or a woman?" Cherry grinned. "It's a secret." The humidity in California was mild in winter and dry in summer, making it just right for sleeping comfortably. With the curtains closed, Nora's room was completely dark. She slept soundly. It was the middle of the day when she finally opened her eyes. Cherry and Mrs. Lewis had already had lunch, so she ordered herself takeout. Down at the hotel entrance, Angela watched Anthony enter the lobby. He was in a hurry. She clenched her fists. Over the past few days, Anthony's attitude had been perfunctory whenever she'd called, and all he'd talked to her about was ideally in pharmaceuticals. She could sense that something was wrong. So she trailed him this morning, not expecting him to lead her here. Hotel Finest was one of the most expensive upmarket places in California. Angela quietly followed him in and watched him go to the bar on the first floor. He approached some waiters, took out some cash and handed it to them. "You know what you're supposed to do, right? Watch out for my signals tonight." "Yes, sir." They left, and Anthony nervously took a deep breath before taking out his phone and drafting a message. "Hello, Miss Anderson. Sorry if this is presumptuous, but I got your number from the hotel bar. Please meet me there at 8 p.m. After sending this text, he looked at the setup in front of him with satisfaction. He wasn't clear on how he'd offended the pretty woman when he last saw her, but he was confident she would definitely fall for him this time. After all, no woman would be able to resist a romantic move like this. She didn't respond to his message. After a few minutes, Anthony messaged out to his friends. 8 p.m. tonight, Hotel Finest bar. Be there or be square. He'd reserved the whole place and he wanted his friends to come and cheer him on. But he didn't realise that he'd accidentally sent Angela the message too. Angela's phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down at the message that had just arrived. Anthony left the bar and the waiters whispered to each other. "What's Mr. Gray up to? He's prepared a huge surprise. He must be intending to propose, right? Whoever he's getting engaged to is so lucky." Angela's cheeks turned pink in embarrassment as she listened to them speculate and reread the message from Anthony. How could she have suspected that he was being unfaithful? She really should have trusted him. She couldn't help laughing. His tone was exactly the same as any other message. If she hadn't secretly seen all the preparations, she would never have imagined he'd arranged something special for her. She walked out of the bar in a good mood. Then she spotted Nora, who had come downstairs to pick up her takeout. Despite being in her pajamas and slippers and looking half asleep still, she was incredibly attractive. Everyone in the lobby was watching her. How can she possibly afford to stay here? Angela thought enviously, her fists clenching again. She must be pretending to be rich. Her jealousy got the better of her, and she took a couple of steps toward Nora. "You don't even have clothes anymore, yet you still insist on staying in this hotel. What's the plan? Seduce some rich guy? Look at yourself. Do you really think you can trick people into spending money on you just based on your looks?" Nora, who was carrying her takeout in one hand and her cell phone in the other, looked confused at Angela's sudden outbursts. She deleted Anthony's texts. Then she replied, "At least I have a face I'm proud of." Her cat-like eyes swept across Angela's face disdainfully as she insulted her. Angela was infuriated. Is she saying I'm shameless or implying I'm ugly? Or wait, is it both? She narrowed her eyes, but then smiled suddenly. Nora, do you want to know where that abandoned child of yours is? If you do, then I'll see you at the bar at 8 p.m. So what if she's pretty now? Anthony dumped her and picked me. Angela wanted Nora to see with her own eyes how Anthony was going to propose to her. She turned and left. Nora watched her go. 8 p.m. at the bar again. What's going on? I'll see what my precious little sister and ex-fiancé have prepared, she thought as she went back upstairs with the takeout. After lunch, Nora was busy all afternoon. Mrs. Lewis made a healthy dinner. The new suite wasn't the best, but it still had a decent kitchen. Cherry was growing. They mustn't eat out all the time. As she sat at the table, Nora noticed that Cherry looked troubled. The girl sighed deeply. Mummy, I'm bored. Nora stroked her face and asked, Why aren't you playing your games, baby? It's the weekend, Cherry explained. All the school kids are on holiday. Nora smiled. She often felt that Cherry might have forgotten that she was just a kindergartner. She passed Cherry her food and asked, What do you want to do? I'll spend some time with you. It's fine, Mummy, you're busy. Cherry put on her sensible face and her round eyes darted about. Can you get Mrs. Lewis to walk round the hotel with me tonight at 8? Nora pretended not to notice her daughter trying to be sneaky and chuckled softly. Sure. Her daughter was very cheeky and always coming up with all sorts of eccentric ideas. She'd also always been a smart, sensible child and never let anyone take advantage of her. Nora didn't need to worry about her going for a walk with Mrs. Lewis. As 8 p.m. approached, they finished eating, tidied up, and got ready to leave the room. They split up once they got out into the hallway. Nora headed down to the bar. Cherry watched her mum get in the elevator before taking out her phone and sending a message. Chesty, I'm ready. Where are you? Chester's reply came almost instantly. Table 28 at the cafe on the first floor. I'll be waiting for you here. Cherry grinned. Okie dokie, I'll be there right away. The bar on the first floor of the hotel was already bubbling with voices. Anthony was quite well known across California. The friends he had invited to the party had all brought even more friends along, filling up the bar. The bright lights shining across the entire bar blurred the scene. Men and women twisted their bodies fervently on the dance floor. Angela, dressed in a long red gown, was sitting in the corner with a drink in her hand. Her cheeks were bright and rosy. She was surrounded by her usual group of fair-weather friends who took turns complimenting her. Hotel Finest is not cheap, Angela. Anthony must have big plans in mind, right? Is he going to propose? He must be proposing, I'm sure of it. Isn't your sister back? That's the end of it, right? Their engagement can officially be considered cancelled. It's all her fault. She spent all those years hiding abroad, refusing to do anything about the engagement. You could have married Anthony a long time ago if not for her. Hey, what is she doing here? Alarmed, Angela turned to look toward the entrance. Nora had dressed just as casually that evening as in the previous days since her return to California. She was wearing comfortably fitted jeans and a black t-shirt that set off the skin around her neck, making it look so fair that it practically glowed white. She was expressionless. Her eyes were slightly lidded, and she gave off a world-weary attitude. Yet her looks were eye-catching and beautiful. She drew the attention of the entire party as soon as she entered the room. The moment she walked into the bar, a waiter rushed to the back to hiss to Anthony, Mr. Gray, she's here. Anthony stood up immediately. This is it. Get ready. The loud music in the bar gave Nora a headache, and she was quickly filled with an overwhelming sense of irritation. She looked around the bar indifferently. When she spotted Angela, she headed over toward her. Before she had made it very far, she heard her sister sneer pretentiously. Why are you here, Nora? Anthony will never agree to meet you. Her friends were quick to chime in. Nora, you must have heard that Anthony is going to propose tonight. Don't make a scene. You were the one who screwed around, cheating and getting yourself pregnant before the wedding. That's why Anthony dumped you. Are you here to harass him again? Aren't you ashamed? Even if you are a little prettier now, you've still got your kid to deal with. Why would he ever pay attention to you? Just give it up. Their voices were loud and hateful, but the music was much louder. It quickly drowned out many of their spiteful words, meaning that the standoff between Nora and Angela's followers didn't really attract much attention from the rest of the crowd. Nora wasn't interested in what they had to say. She focused on Angela. "Tell me where my son is." Angela approached her with a sardonic smile. She pointed to the sofa and spoke so that only the two of them could hear. "Nora, if you sit down nicely, watch tonight's show all the way through, give me and Anthony your blessing for everyone to hear, if you do that, I'll tell you." Now Nora understood. Angela wanted to use the marriage proposal scene to humiliate her. Nora knew she didn't have a chance. The private investigators she'd engaged didn't have any leads at all. So as long as there was a glimmer of hope, she was unwilling to give up. Nora sat on the sofa and leaned back. She closed her eyes, her long eyelashes casting shadows on her cheeks as she uttered, "If this is really all you care about, then fine." Angela stared at her fiercely. She didn't understand how her sister could stay so calm. It made her look so foolish in comparison every time. She clenched her fists, searching for something to hurt Nora with. Suddenly, she said, "Hey, Nora, don't you ever wonder what things would have been like if you hadn't been fat? If you'd always been this pretty, would Anthony even have broken off your engagement in the first place?" Nora's eyes suddenly flew open, and they glinted sharply as she glared daggers at Angela. "What did you say to me?" Her obesity had been caused by hormonal injections in her childhood. Years later, she had discovered that her original prescription had been wrong. But knowing that now didn't lessen the pain she had felt struggling with her body as she grew up. Even though she had worked so hard to lose weight and suffered so much, her efforts had been useless for so long. Once she had finally stopped the medication, her body had needed time and careful attention to repair from the damage. Seeing that Nora's expression had finally changed, Angela laughed arrogantly. With a venomous look in her eyes, she said, "We're both Smiths, so why should you be the one to marry into the Greys? We had to do something to even things out. Messing with your meds worked out perfectly in the long run, just like Mom said it would. Look around. Sure enough, Anthony has fallen in love with me." Nora was stunned at Angela's words. Is she really saying that she and her mother purposefully did that to me? And Angela continued, heedless of Nora's reaction. "It really doesn't matter that you've slimmed down now. It's too late. What a waste of that face of yours. If you weren't stuck with that kid, you might have been able to find another man. But now?" Anger roiled in Nora's eyes. She couldn't believe anyone could be so vicious. She had only been 5 when she'd been put on that hormone treatment. She was on the edge of losing her temper. Suddenly, all the lights in the bar went out, and the music came to an abrupt stop. 2 seconds later, a white spotlight shone at the center of the dance floor. Anthony was standing in the light, wearing a white suit, looking as handsome and elegant as ever. He was holding a guitar in his hands. The moment he appeared, everyone in the bar screamed, "Anthony, Anthony." Everyone in the bar, men and women, cheered and shouted his name. Everyone except Nora and Angela. He smiled and then stretched out a finger and gestured for the crowd to quiet down. A hush instantly fell over the room. He strummed the guitar a few times, and a melody began to take form. He gently hummed a popular, familiar love song. Although it wasn't exactly a pro performance, it was a decent rendition. Angela stood up, tears flowing freely down her face. She couldn't believe it. This night was magic. He's so handsome, and he's mine. After finishing the song, Anthony put down the guitar. He held up the microphone and said, "I booked this whole place and got so many friends to join in today, because I've got a special message for a certain somebody. From the very first moment I laid eyes on you, I knew you were extraordinary." "Yeah, Anthony, Anthony!" Everyone cheered again, building up the atmosphere to a climax. Anthony gave a wave. Immediately, a few pops sounded, and the balloons on the ceiling burst, scattering the room with a shower of rose petals from above. Angela covered her mouth. Her eyes were filled with joyful surprise. "This is so romantic." She turned to the side excitedly and sneered at Nora. "Do you see this? Anthony never did anything like this for you. Look at everything he does for me. I'm worth 10 of you." Angela felt like she was flying. Her heart only soared higher when she recognized the envy in the eyes of the other girls around her. She felt like she was going to burst from happiness. Then she saw Anthony slowly walking step by step toward her with a bouquet of roses in his hands. The surrounding crowd cleared a path for him, like an ocean parting. Angela straightened her back. She couldn't help but take a few steps toward him. She knew this day was the highlight of her life. She didn't notice that Anthony only had eyes for someone else. Even in the dimly lit bar, the woman sitting on the sofa was dazzling and eye-catching. He wasn't aware of anyone else, even Angela. All he could think was, this is dramatic enough to be a proposal. She has to at least let me take her out on a date, right? Angela stopped a few steps away from him. Watching him come nearer and nearer, her smile blossomed uncontrollably. This is it. He's about to get down on one knee. It's happening. Angela watched in utter confusion, unable to process what was happening, as Anthony walked past her and stopped in front of Nora instead. He bent down and offered Nora the roses in a suave gesture. "Miss Anderson, may I have the honor of making your acquaintance?" Angela's eyes widened in astonishment as she stared at the scene in disbelief. It was difficult to see in the dim light of the bar, which made her feel as if she were dreaming. She couldn't understand why Anthony had bypassed her and gone up to Nora. Nora definitely hadn't expected such a dramatic twist either. She had only seen Anthony twice since returning to California. Was he seriously dumping Angela, his prospective fiancée, to try and come after her instead? Glancing over Anthony's shoulders, she saw how surprised and furious Angela looked. The sight of her helped Nora calm down a little. She had been so upset that the horrible revelation that Angela and her stepmother had been responsible for her poor health as a child. This revenge was too sweet. The corners of her lips curled upward into a mischievous smile. Her smile, which was as bright and dazzling as a blooming sunflower, made Anthony's eyes light up. He was about to say something, but Angela couldn't control herself anymore. She screamed, "Anthony!" It was only when he heard her voice that Anthony finally noticed Angela standing behind him. He frowned and asked, "What are you doing here?" Angela was still fantasizing that perhaps Anthony had mistaken someone else for her in the darkness. But his question shattered her hopes. She glared at Nora angrily. "You bitch. You can't have him." She raised her hand to strike Nora. Anthony immediately jumped in to stop her. With a stern look, he snapped, "What are you doing, Angela? Don't make a scene." Angela's cheeks flushed angrily. "Are you actually defending her? Do you know?" "Enough," Anthony interrupted her. "Look at yourself, Angela. You're a mess. Can't you be more like Miss Anderson? Try getting some of her charm and charisma." Angela was stunned. "Who did you say she was? Don't you know who she is?" Anthony was taken aback by her question. "She's Isabel Anderson." He turned to the side to see Nora leaning back leisurely on the sofa. With her lips curled into a smile, she said lazily, "Isabel is my middle name. I also have another name, Nora Smith." The whole bar suddenly fell quiet for a moment. Everyone was getting more and more confused. Anthony stared at her in disbelief. "You..." He was so shocked that he could not think of anything to say. Angela managed to react, however. "She's tricked you, Anthony. She's tricked us both. She did it on purpose just to make you look ridiculous. She's turning us into a joke." Nora had ruined her magical proposal. Angela really hated her guts now. Angela shouted to everyone around her, "What are you all just standing around for? Get her! She's ruined everything." Lots of the people in the bar were friends with Angela as well as Anthony. In response to her cries, they began to surround Nora. At the sight of so many people crowding around her, Nora stretched and rolled her shoulders, warming up for the scene she knew was about to come. Meanwhile, Justin had just entered the lobby. He was about to go straight to the elevator when he heard a commotion in the bar. Through the glass walls, he immediately spotted the woman on the sofa. There was a little more frostiness than usual in her perpetually distant expression. There was malice on the faces of everyone around her. From the looks of things, it seemed she was about to be assaulted by the whole group. Seeing that they were about to start, Justin diverted his path and entered the bar. "Stop!" Nora had been just about to jump into action, but the sound of Justin's deep, fierce voice made her pause. He strode into the bar, followed by a team of well-trained bodyguards. In no time, they had taken control of the situation. Justin looked as elegant and commanding as ever. He was wearing a luxurious bespoke hand-tailored suit. His stance and expression exuded a chilly, menacing aura. His cold eyes swept across the place, and he slowly said, "No kind of brawling or fighting is tolerated in Hotel Finest." Nora, who had only just gotten into the mood to fight, slumped back on the couch. "Gee," she thought, laughing a little to herself. "That guy sure has a lot of rules." It was affecting her performance. The entire crowd was frozen, intimidated by Justin's overpowering aura. Anthony, thinking he could still be the one calling the shots, braced himself and asked, "Who are you?" Lawrence, who was following closely behind Justin, answered, "This is Mr. Hunt." Mr. Hunt from Hotel Finest? Justin Hunt, the owner himself. Anthony had heard that he was here in California on a business trip. His family had given him 1,001 warnings not to mess with the Hunts. The attitude of the crowd changed drastically. Lawrence didn't understand why his boss had taken such a personal interest in the scene, but since he had set out the rules, they had to be enforced. He cleared his throat, raised his chin, and called out to the crowd. "How dare you try to start a fight at Hotel Finest? What's wrong with you all? Get out!" The chastened crowd began to hurry away. When Nora saw that Angela was also preparing to escape with the rest of the group, a sharp look flashed across her eyes. She grabbed Angela's arm. "Angela, there's something you haven't said yet." Angela was already in a panic by this point. She glanced at Justin fearfully, wishing only to leave quickly. She lowered her voice and returned, "Quit acting crazy. Let go of me." "Okay." Nora let go of her arm. Angela heaved a sigh of relief, but as she turned away and was about to leave, a huge force struck her from behind, knocking the wind out of her. Angela hit the table in front of her and fell to the ground. She felt as if all her internal organs were aching. Stunned, she thought, "Did Nora just kick me?" Nora walked over and grabbed her by the hair. In a fervent tone, she said, "Do you remember what you wanted to tell me now?" Angela's eyes widened. Desperately, she shouted, "She's attacking me, Mr. Hunt." Justin frowned. That woman's kick had been unexpectedly powerful. She seemed to have some pretty good moves, which made him feel as if his rescue had been a wasted effort. Before he could say anything, Lawrence stepped forward to reprimand her. "Fighting is prohibited in Hotel Finest, Miss Smith. Do you have no regard for Mr. Hunt's rules?" Nora looked up slightly. She had an innocent expression on her face, as if she were the most well-behaved and sensible person in the room. She replied softly, "But I'm just one person. She had the whole crowd coming for me. I was scared. It was self-defense." Frightened, Angela screamed, "Help!" Out of the corner of her eye, Nora could see a couple of Angela's more loyal friends trying to approach them. She glanced at them coldly and said, "Are you ignoring the rules? Coming after me again?" They backed away slowly. Seeing that no one would try and interrupt them again, she looked down at Angela. She hadn't planned to be harsh. They were still half-sisters after all. She had only wanted to know the whereabouts of her son. But now that she knew Angela and her mother had played a part in sabotaging her as a child, messing with her hormones when she was only 5, the fury she felt outweighed her sense of restraint. She sprinted toward a meek-looking Angela and hissed in a dreadful voice, "If you continue to keep silent, I'll beat you up so bad you won't even recognize yourself anymore." A trembling Angela couldn't hold it in anymore. She burst into tears and said, "I'll talk. I'll talk. I'll tell you what I know about your other child." That whole situation with your other child, Dad was the one that handled it. He never told me any details. I don't know anything. Angela was sobbing so hard that Nora could barely understand what she was saying. Everyone else was too far away to hear their conversation. Nora frowned slightly, frightening Angela so badly that she cried out, "I really don't know. I swear, you can break my nose if it turns out I'm lying." Angela had been vain since she was a child. Nora knew she would never risk her good looks over a lie. Nora couldn't hide her disappointment, but she couldn't be bothered to waste any more time on this. So she stood up and slowly walked out. When she passed by Justin, Nora thought of how he'd rushed in to defend her. She had thanked him by getting violent herself. She wondered if he was embarrassed by her behavior. She wanted to explain. She turned her head to look at Justin. He was looking back at her, his eyes deep and unfathomable. Nora thought for a moment. Once she knew what she wanted to say, her lips parted. But the moment she opened her mouth, she couldn't suppress a wide yawn. Justin was rendered speechless. Next to him, Lawrence was furious. It was bad enough she attacked that other woman and Mr. Hunt just let it happen. But now she's yawning in his face? Who does she think she is? She's really pushing her luck. As soon as the thought appeared in his mind, the woman spoke. "Sorry, I wasn't trying to cause trouble for you, Mr. Hunt." The corners of Lawrence's lips spasmed a little. He thought dismissively, only a fool would believe that. He was just about to give her a sarcastic reply when he heard his boss's simple, icy-cold reply, "Uh-huh." Lawrence was confused. Her explanation was finished. Nora continued on her way. Justin stared at her as she walked away and narrowed his eyes. The woman's actions just now had been decisive and straightforward, and hadn't been sloppy in the least. They had seemed calculated. But it also seemed like she hadn't gotten what she wanted, and she looked a little sad. He found himself feeling compelled to help her. While he was contemplating this unexpected reaction, he heard Lawrence snort, "It's a good thing you stopped those rich brats from ganging up on her. Otherwise, Miss Smith might have beaten them all to a pulp." Justin didn't respond. Lawrence continued, "I hope she didn't think you were going out of your way just to save her. She's already currying favor with Pete to get close to you. If she takes this the wrong way, it'll be even harder to shake her off." Justin gave him a frosty look. "Keep your advice to yourself." Meanwhile, Cherry had made her way to the cafe. She was wearing a t-shirt, overalls, cowboy hat, and sunglasses. From head to toe, she looked adorable and endearing. She bounced into the cafe and picked up her cell phone to find that Chesty had sent her several text messages. "Are you here yet? You're already 10 minutes late. I hope you're not running away. Are you secretly an amazingly hot girl or something?" Cherry was about to reply when she received a call from Chesty. She picked up and said, "I'm here, Chesty. Table 25, 26, 28. Chester was already seated there with 3 empty glasses in front of him, bored out of his mind. Yeah, table 28. That's right. You're here. Where are you?" "Look down." He looked down and saw the top of a cowboy hat. His gaze continued down past the brim of the hat to see the incredibly familiar face of his nephew, Pete. Chester was perplexed. He rubbed his eyes and opened them again. The child was still there in front of him. He became even more confused, and he nervously said into the phone, "Leader?" "I'm here, Chesty." Beside him was the small child speaking in a high-pitched voice. Through his cell phone, he could hear the same voice. Chester collapsed back into his chair as if he had just seen a ghost. He looked at Cherry incredulously and stammered, "Leader?" Cherry blinked her big round eyes. "Uh-huh, that's me." She hadn't expected to find out that her uncle was Chesty either. The two of them had even had pizza with her father. Cherry ended the call on her phone climbed into the chair opposite and sat down. Then she said to a waitress, "A glass of milk, please. I'm still growing up, so I can't drink coffee. Thank you." The waitress's heart melted into a puddle of goo at the sight of the grinning little kid. "Sure, kiddo, just a moment." She quickly ran off to get the milk. Chester felt as if the sky was falling. He couldn't believe that this confident little kid was really his nephew. Pete had always been so shy and clumsy with words. Has he just been pretending to be a quiet kid all this time? Is he just messing with his dad? It was bad enough that Chester himself was messing around playing games all day long. But Pete was the one and only grandson of the Hunt family. He was Justin's only son. If Justin found out that he had been playing games with Pete, Chester swallowed hard. He felt like a dead man walking. Chester shuddered. Suddenly, he jumped to his feet anxiously. Shit, it's already 8:30. Justin will be getting back soon. You have to hurry and get back upstairs to do your homework, or your dad's gonna kill us both. He threw $30 on the table, grabbed Cherry by the hand, and ran out of the cafe with her as if they were competing in a sprint. But as he reached the hotel lobby, he spotted Justin exiting the bar with a group of bodyguards and waiting by the elevator. Chester was shocked. He let go of Chesty's hand and said, "Go up the stairs to the second floor while I stop Justin. After that, hurry up to the top floor, and don't let anyone find you." Without waiting for Cherry to reply, Chester rushed toward Justin, trying to suppress his nervous, jittery energy. "I need to have a talk with you, Justin." Justin asked, "What kind of talk?" Chester braced himself against his brother's icy gaze, bit the bullet, and said, A heart-to-heart talk." "I'm not available right now," Justin said coldly and entered the elevator. Chester followed him in. To buy more time, he pressed the elevator buttons for every floor in a panic. "It'll only take a little of your time, Justin." Justin narrowed his eyes and said with mild displeasure, "This had better be important." "Justin, I think I..." Chester racked his brains, but he couldn't think of any troubles that he had. Finally, he mumbled out, I don't like women." He was dumbfounded that that was all he'd been able to come up with. Thankfully, he'd mumbled so quietly that Justin wasn't sure he'd heard him right. When his brother asked him to repeat himself, he panicked. "No, I mean, I don't know what I'm saying, Justin. Chester rambled meaninglessly for the rest of the elevator ride, desperately trying to fill the time and failing to hide his own nerves. When they reached the top floor and opened the door, he saw Pete sitting studying at his desk. He gave a huge sigh of relief. After watching Justin enter the study, Chester snuck over to Pete and winked. "Good work, kid. I made a fool of myself in that elevator, but I guess it was worth it." Pete's mind filled with questions as he tried to understand his uncle's inexplicable words. He wondered if Uncle Chester had gone mad. Downstairs in the lobby, Cherry was puzzled. She had watched her father and uncle enter the elevator, and she had run after them with her short little legs. Unfortunately, she wasn't fast enough, and the door had slid shut before she could join them. Her uncle had told her to go to the top floor. But there were 2 presidential suites on the top floor, and she didn't know which one he wanted her to go to. Cherry wondered if it was possible that Daddy might be the dummy next door Mummy had told her about. She decided to go to the top floor to look for her father anyway. She could ask him why he had made her and her mum move to a different room. Is it because he didn't like us anymore? With that in mind, she entered the elevator, pushed herself up on tiptoe, and pressed the button to send the elevator to the top floor. Hotel Finest's management was very strict. Guests had to use their room cards in the elevator too. As she wasn't staying in one of the top floor suites anymore, Cherry couldn't access the top level of the building by swiping her new card through the reader. She pouted unhappily. After thinking about it, she decided to return for now to the 38th floor, where her new room was. She could go up the stairs from there. But as soon as she got out of the elevator, she ran into Nora. When Cherry saw the look on Nora's face, she decided on the spot to change her plans. She could still look for Daddy tomorrow, but her mummy was obviously upset and in need of comfort. Nora had called several private investigators, but there was still no leads. If Angela really didn't know where her son was, then her father might be the only one who knew the truth. But negotiating with him for any information would be difficult. He was no simple-minded fool like Angela. Breaking through her swirling thoughts, a small figure jumped over and hugged her leg. "Mummy, I love you so much." Glad for the interruption, Nora rubbed Cherry's head and asked softly, "Where did you go? Did you have fun with Mrs. Lewis?" Cherry looked at her fingers. She didn't dare look Nora in the eye as she lied. "We just walked around the hotel. It isn't any fun here at all. Mummy, let's go to bed." Nora sighed and opened the door. "Okay." Then she turned around to see Cherry leaning against the wall and striking a pose like a model. "Mummy, if you miss my brother, then you can just look at me. He probably looks just like me. We're twins after all." Nora chuckled. "Oh, sweetheart, boy-girl twins aren't identical. Just like ordinary siblings, it's very difficult for them to look exactly the same." Cherry dramatically hung her head in disappointment. "Aw, I thought he would look just like me." Nora laughed and brought her into the room. After taking a bath, the two got ready for bed. Nora's cell phone rang. The call was from the Smiths. She cast her eyes down and contemplated for a moment whether or not to answer. Making her decision, she turned off the cell phone and went to sleep next to her daughter. When Nora woke up the next day, Cherry had already quietly gotten out of bed and was playing with Mrs. Lewis outside. Nora took a look at her cell phone. Aside from dozens of missed calls from the Smiths, there was also one from her Aunt Irene. Irene, who was her aunt on her father's side of the family, had been the kindest to her during all these years. It was because of her that Nora still had a good relationship with her cousin Lisa. Thinking she would get to speak with Irene, Nora returned the call. Someone picked up very quickly, but it was her father's voice that rang out, not Irene's. "Well, here I was, thinking that you'd already abandoned the family, Nora." She rolled her eyes lazily and got out of bed to get something to eat. "What's up?" "Don't give me your attitude. What happened yesterday? Did you sabotage Anthony's proposal to your sister? She said you attacked her. You've been saying for years that you wanted to cancel your engagement. Now that you've gotten your way, why are you trying to get Anthony back again? He's Angela's now." Nora sighed. It had always been like this, ever since she had been young. The moment she and Angela had a disagreement, Henry would blame her without even trying to find out the truth. She was depressingly used to it. She said calmly, "Then why didn't he propose to her?" "He was going to, but you've messed everything up now. Come back right now and apologize to your sister. Otherwise, don't blame me if I disown you. Do what you want." Nora was about to hang up, but Henry yelled angrily, "You ungrateful, disobedient brat. This is no time for your attitude. We're in the middle of an emergency with your aunt. Do you even care?" Nora paused. "What's wrong with her? She has a brain tumor. If you have any decency left, then come to the hospital in town. Otherwise, you'll miss your chance to see your aunt for the last time." "I'll be right over." After hanging up, Nora quickly washed up, changed, and went out. When the elevator arrived, there were already two smartly dressed women inside. Nora entered and made sure the button for the lobby had been pushed. She leant against the wall and kept her eyes glued to the floor on the ride down. She overheard the discussion between the two other women. "Isn't it inappropriate for us to treat him like that? Surely it's corporal punishment." "Don't be ridiculous. We were sent by the old lady. Besides, he didn't even cry. He doesn't talk much at all. I've heard he might be autistic. He just behaves so badly. I have to admit, it felt a little good when I saw him be reprimanded. Being rich is no excuse. He still has to listen to us. But what if the father finds out? He will only find